I'm here with Dina Wakley, and we are working on wood panels today, Dina. That's such an interesting substrate.
There's no give.
Yeah.
And so when you're on a canvas, sometimes if you ever have to press hard, you get that little give. And I don't really like that, so wood panels are my absolute favorite to work on.
Me too.
If I'm gonna put something on my wall, and you can paint over them a million times when your work is ugly. All right, so here's what we're gonna start with. We're gonna play with rubbing alcohol in our paint layers, and there's a little bit of a learning curve for when to put the alcohol on. You gotta time it right.
And I noticed that, by the way, that these are not plain wood panels, they are gessoed.
Yeah, I did do a thin coat of gesso.
Okay.
So let that dry. So grab your brush.
Yes.
Just start applying some color. This time we're not gonna water anything down. We're gonna leave it nice and thick. How much should you apply?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. We're being very precise then,
the
I say, about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rubbing alcohol, it will take out dry paint if you let it soak for a good long time.
Okay.
But you can create some really interesting effects if you put it on paint that is not completely wet, but just sort of starting to set a little bit. Now, where I live in Arizona, that happens pretty much before I'm done.
I was going to say, and I'm in Boston, and it might take a little while, especially in the summer.
You might need to do it the next day. Right? The next day might be your jam. Okay, so we've got a little bit of paint on there and blab for long enough, right? Now what I want you to do, this will turn up if you have any paper cuts.
Okay.
I just flick it onto my fingers, and I'm just going to flick it down.
Okay. I'm going to give that a try now and see. Oops. Oh my gosh.
So you're
I
getting
can see what it's doing to the paint.
But now take your scraper.
Okay.
And now I want you to move the layers around.
Does it matter which side of the scraper
I'm using the flat.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm using the flat edge. Because now what we're doing is we're playing with the difference between a diluted paint and an undiluted paint. And you can get all sorts of interesting textures happening. I can move some of this blue paint here over into the pink and smush it. It's smushing. That's the technical term.
That's the technical term.
The technical term is smushing. Okay, and the key is lather, rinse, repeat.
What does that mean?
That means you do this.
Yes.
And then guess what I do again?
Go back to the alcohol or the paint?
Go back to the paint.
Okay.
So now I'm going to come back, and any areas that you might not like, I personally like all of them. I actually like almost everything I do because I have low standards. So I'm going to come back.
Well, I think, I always say it's not low standards, it's letting go of expectations so that you're not expecting it to be anything in particular, but rather you're accepting whatever comes.
Acceptance and not criticism is what you need to apply to yourself.
Silence that inner critic. And by the way, I can tell that you just do however much. There's no precision here about the alcohol. It's whatever you want.
And I don't love it in a spray bottle.
Really?
I do not.
How come?
I just don't want to aspirate it. I'm just weird that way. So,
because it does have an odor, like I can smell the rubbing alcohol.
This is medical grade rubbing alcohol. So people are like, why don't you use vodka? I don't know, why don't you? Let me know. Then these also have a combed edge. So you can always comb through as well. So you kind of play and play with the textures here. Let those dry all the way. Okay. And the alcohol will dry pretty quickly, but I love the interplay you get with the translucency that it gives.
It's
and look,
really
you can
neat.
get drips, all kinds of good stuff. Okay, so I've got a couple panels here that I did at home.
I can see that.
And they're already dry.
Done.
Okay, can you see where they've been scraped? And
yeah, I can see all the scraping, and I can see the little alcohol dots.
And where it dissolves and dries, you get, it almost looks like agate, I think.
Oh yeah,
okay,
and the gesso is letting it float on the surface, right? That's part of the reason you need that.
So wash your brush a bit. Now this time we're gonna use wet color.
Okay. I'm ready. By the way, I would just like to point out that we both are doing this thing where you stamp your brush on the bottom, and that actually really helps get it out.
And I tend to be pretty bad at washing my own materials. Okay, so now, what we want to do is we want to apply some water with the paint. And there is a learning curve, because if you put too much water, our little droplets are going to go away. If you don't do enough water, you won't get any droplets at all.
Oh no, I'm nervous.
So guess what happens if that doesn't work?
You just do it again.
You wipe it off. You have your trusty dusty cloth nearby, and you can just wipe it off. So what I want to do is I want to put a wash of color
over the whole thing?
Not necessarily. You can do the whole thing.
Okay.
Or you can just do pieces. We're using a dark color today so that it shows up. I can tell right now that might be a tad wet, but let's try.
Okay.
Because
so this is the too much water that I may have used.
Maybe. We'll see. And then in enough time as it takes for you to see if anybody sent you anything on social media, you want it to be about half evaporated. Okay, so see how yours is really wet. So let that sit while I do mine, and it might give you enough time. Okay. So I'm just gonna reach in front of you and grab this alcohol. This is almost like masking, but instead of painting around a shape, we're flicking the alcohol in it. And this is when you get the really, really strong bubbles. We had little bubbles before, right?
These ones are more dramatic, though. I can see that because they're actually now revealing the color that is underneath that darker paint we put on. Correct. Oh, and you flicked mine.
But watch what happens here.
Okay.
So because this one is so wet, that hole will eventually go away.
It's going to close back up.
It'll close back up. Okay. And here I almost flicked a little too much on.
So you could add more paint, though, right?
So you can add more paint. In fact, I can let this dry and do another layer over it. Sometimes what I do is wicking. So I'm going to take my rag, and in the puddle, if you just blot it, what do you end up with?
A hole where it was.
Yeah, you end up with a hole. So I stick the cloth in the puddle and I try to wick it a little bit.
Oh, I do this with tissue all the time on watercolor because I'm a terrible watercolorist, and so it just easily lifts that color away.
You're wicking it away without creating that void. Now try to flick it. You're going to definitely get some here because you've got it half dried.
Let's see. Flick, flick, flick.
You can also pour some on your brush if you don't want it to be quite so big, but I think it looks very mineral.
I think it's super cool because it totally looks like stone or something cool like that.
That was logical. Yeah, it looks like stone, but if you flick this way.
Oh, then you get those teeny tiny droplets that are so cool.
Yeah. And so now that I've done that, this is great for your brushes too. It will clean dried paint out. I can change colors and
just adding in. So this is so forgiving because you can keep going and going.
You can keep going and going. If your foundation, if your background ended up really dark, don't use a dark color over it. Use white. Use a white color. Okay, so let's flick that. Why don't you go ahead and flick that? Look how I'm getting that yellow come from underneath.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you know, it actually starts to look like some kind of dyed fabric or discharge with bleach. Yeah, batik, totally. And because of the wicking and the way that it's going, I love this edge, like the wood panel, actually because it has a grain, the paint is sitting and running and the alcohol is running into the grain, even though there's that thin coat of gesso underneath.
I see people.
Oh my gosh.
Do you see him? Okay, so that's when this comes into play.
So you're gonna use a water-soluble pencil.
Water-soluble pencil, and then I'm gonna come along, and if by some Christmas miracle, I can see something in my background.
You just embrace it. And I see, when you say you see a person, it is literally just the barest shape of a human. It is not like details at all, which I love. So you don't have to be able to draw a face or anything like that.
No, just basic outlines. You could do a flower.